Testing. Is it on? Okay. Good evening. Welcome and thank you for attending. My name is Carolyn White, and I'm the host for this evening for City Club. And so I just a couple of housekeeping things. If everybody could silence their cell phones, that would really help. I know I always forget to do that. And then in addition to our guests for this evening, I just also wanted to let you know that Christina Glasscock from Twin Falls County Clerk's Office is here this evening to join us. So, and we have the cards over there and pencils. If you have any questions, we'll collect them later towards the end. And so when we get ready to do that, just hold them up and we'll come around and collect them all and turn them into our moderators. So our moderator for this evening is going to be President Fisher from the college. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter for this evening, Phil McCrane, our Secretary of State.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you for your interest in elections. Hopefully you know there's an election coming up. If you're in this room, I would certainly hope so. And it really is a pleasure to be here in Twin Falls. One of the great privileges for me in this job is getting to travel around the state and see so many different places, but certainly Twin Falls is particularly special. Christina and I have worked together going back to when I had hair. To put that into context, it's been well over a decade that we've been working really closely together. I used to serve as the Ada County clerk, and then prior to that, I was an elections nerd straight out of college. So I've been an elections nerd for a very long time. I'm guessing tonight, as we chat about some of the things coming up, I will highlight just how nerdy I can truly be when it comes to this stuff. And I really am looking forward to the opportunity to answer your questions. Certainly, there is a lot going on right now. The November 5th election is, let's see, we are 13 days and 1 hour away, but who's counting? There's a lot going on in our office. It is a really neat time to be out here with everything going on. Obviously, this is a major national election. You can't turn on the news or look at an app or do whatever, or listen to the radio without hearing something about the presidential election. You can appreciate both Christina and Glasscock and I are very fortunate to live in Idaho and not in Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, heck, especially North Carolina, any of the states where the real battleground states are. But beyond the presidential election, and I know for sure that what's going to drive a lot of our turnout in this election is the presidential election, there are some really important races here in the state of Idaho. We have a constitutional amendment on the ballot, we have Proposition 1 that's on the ballot, and then also not far from here, I'm not going to say here in Twin Falls, but we have some very competitive legislative races. So Jerome County, if anybody's here from Jerome, certainly competitive legislative district race there. Boise has a very competitive race. Pocatello has a competitive race. Moscow has a competitive race, or races, I guess I should say. So there's parts of the state that are still battlegrounds, and we'll get a chance to talk about some of that. I know I want to say a special thanks to President Fisher. He's here somewhere hiding. Oh, there you are, straight in front of me. Might as well be the most obvious. It feels like I'm in church because the front pews are empty and the rest, everyone's sitting in the back. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your patience. I was going to come out before the primary election, but I'm here now before the general election. So for everybody in the City Club's patience, it really is a great opportunity to be able to highlight what we're doing in elections around the state. So I'll have a chance to talk a little bit, just what are our preparations, why you should have confidence in your vote here in Idaho. And then I'm going to at least take some privilege and share some of the really nerdy side of some of the fun, interesting data that our office processes, because that's really the fun stuff, in addition to taking your questions. I think one of the best places to kick off is, as you see scrolling behind me, is our website. We launched a new version of voteidaho.gov right before the primary election in February. It really has transformed. We've had the website in the past, But it used to be, and I know some people in the room can attest to this, it used to be you had to go to different websites for different things. If you wanted to register, you went to one website. If you wanted results, you had to go to a different website. If you wanted campaign finance information, somewhere else. If you wanted to run for office, a different place. Now, voteidaho.gov is your one-stop shop for voting information for the state of Idaho. So whether it's right now, if you want to see your sample ballot, and see what you're going to be voting on locally. This election is the first time we have sample ballots available statewide that are specific. You'll see the exact same ballot that you will get when you vote on election day. You can find your polling place, so if you need to make a plan for how you're going to vote on November 5th, you can get that information. You can look up the early voting options here. So the Twin Falls County Elections Office has early voting underway, has already been extremely busy and popular with early voting early in this election. I would say if you want to, you can request an absentee ballot. The window to do that is narrowing, so if you need an absentee ballot, you're going to be busy on election day. Friday is the deadline to request an absentee ballot, so do that soon because that deadline is coming up quickly. I mean, all of it is really coming together. You can appreciate our office is extremely busy right now, and I should note along with me is Nicole Fitzgerald. Nicole is my chief deputy. She's my right hand. Our office is involved in so many things kind of leading up to it. Hopefully this isn't the first time you've at least heard my voice or something as we prepare for the election. I really am expecting record turnout here for the state of Idaho. There's a lot of interest in the election. There's a lot of interest nationally in the election. And so we expect people to turn out. Plus, the state just keeps growing. We'll talk a little bit about what that means for the state of Idaho in terms of the growth that we're seeing. So I think just a starting point is the Vote Idaho website. It really is a great resource for any of the questions. And I'm going to show you tonight some of the cool tools, like the fun stuff that we have on the website as well. One of the things, this image here that we're looking at that we just scrolled by, I think one of the really cool things and fortunate things for us here as a state is just how closely we all work together. So in my role as the chief election official, I sit about as far removed from so much of it as possible. I think it's really our poll workers who are the ones on the ground helping make our election possible, and it's through the work at the county level. So Christina, Cy, all the 44 county clerks around the state, they're the ones on the ground actually getting the ballots out to people, processing the votes, all of that. And it's a team effort. And one of the cool things was right at the end of September, the clerks happened to be in Boise, and so we all gathered on the Capitol steps. And what you see here on the display is all 44 county clerks, bipartisan effort, signed our commitment to Idaho voters in terms of what the principles are that we use here in Idaho. And first and foremost is that voting should be easy. We're fortunate to be in a state where if you work shift work, so you work at the hospital on election day, you can still have the opportunity to go vote early in person and have your vote counted just the same as it would on election day. If you're going to be traveling or you're headed down to Arizona because it's getting cold, although it doesn't seem to get cold here in the fall anymore, you can still have the opportunity to vote. And I think that's one of the important things. Registration. Many people registered in advance of the election using the voteidaho.gov website. But beyond that, too, it's not just important to have access, but it's also important to ensure security. And so our elections are secure. We have some very common sense, simple practices to help ensure the security of your vote. Things like photo ID. One of the most common questions I get when people move here is like, well, why don't we have photo ID? We do, and we have for over a decade. Recently, 2 years ago, we updated our photo ID requirements for registration to make them more specific, that you must have a government-issued ID in order to register to vote, and then you will also be asked for your ID when you go to the polls to vote. That's a really simple step. Another piece is voting on paper ballots. Every vote in Idaho will be recorded on some form of a paper ballot. And that piece of paper is your official vote. That's your record. So when we do a recount, which during the primary, we had a race for the legislature that was determined by 2 votes. We went through and counted all of the pieces of paper in that election. We didn't go back to the machines that had tabulated them. We went through and we counted the paper. Our office does post-election audits. When we do audits after the election, we randomly select counties, we randomly select precincts. We go in and hand count those random precincts and counties to verify that the results that were posted on election night match with what our auditors come and find. Nicole was just leading a whole training of team of auditors getting ready. Our office is focused right now on the post-election audit and gearing up so that right after the election's done, our team can hit the ground traveling the state to start auditing the elections. I mean, those are like really simple, basic practices. In addition to just dealing with the face-to-face interaction with a voter, one of the things that we have to also worry about, especially in this day and age, is using technology, is cybersecurity. I sit on a national committee. I'm the Republican Secretary of State who sits on the EIISAC. This is now getting into federal acronyms, but it's our Elections Security Information Exchange for cybersecurity information. And we do have nation states. Iran, China, Russia are interested in accessing our election information. Well, the simplest way to keep Iran out of our elections is to cut the cord. That the systems that count and tabulate the votes are never connected to the internet. Just last session, for the legislators who are in the room, we passed a bill saying the machines can never be connected to the internet. That is one of the simplest ways to ensure the security of our elections. These are just some of the basic common sense practices that we're doing to make sure you can have confidence that your vote counts. And I know, when we get to Q&A, we can talk about a bunch of other things. Voter roll maintenance, that's one of the big things that's been a lot of focus nationally, but also in the state, is some of the checks that we do. It's not just when the poll worker looks at someone's photo ID that we are validating their information. It's also, we're connected, the state voter registration system is connected to ITD. So, if you go to voteidaho.gov, you can't do it right now because registration is closed, but you try to register online, in real time as you're doing it, it is accessing the ITD database to validate your driver's license, your address, your personal information in real time as we're doing it. We check against Social Security Administration to make sure they're alive. We check against vital statistics to make sure you're not dead. We check against Department of Corrections to make sure you're not a felon. Most recently, with the governor's executive order this summer, we've now have access to the Department of Homeland Security's SAVE database to ensure that you're a citizen. And that's been one of the areas that we've been focused on. These are all behind the scenes things that Christina's team, our team are doing to make sure the integrity of our elections is strong, and that when you drop your ballot in the ballot box, you can have faith that your vote is going to count. And I think that's really important, and one of the things I really want to be able to highlight. And I feel so fortunate to work with colleagues all across the state who can come together. After we did the event on the Capitol steps and highlighted our 12 principles, it was one of my colleagues mentioned, they're like, it really hadn't settled with us, but that pretty much most other states couldn't get all of their officials to come together to do something like that. I think it just shows how fortunate we are to be Idahoans, that we can be in a place where your government can work together in the way it's supposed to so that you can ensure that you have the opportunity to vote. That's really one of my big focuses coming into this role and into this office. So I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to serve here as your Secretary of State, to get to go around and talk about these things. I'm really excited to see what's going to come up with the election. If any of you, I will ask questions, but the website, you can also look up. If anybody here has already early voted, you can go on and see that your vote was recorded as having voted. We share all this information around the state. The clerks are all interconnected in terms of the voter participation information. So if somebody votes in Twin Falls, right, and then they decide to rush to Boise and try to cast a second vote, we'll know and instantly to make sure that that doesn't happen. We can talk about a bunch of that stuff as well. I do want to highlight, though, I want to share some of the interesting things that we've got. So let's see, where's my mouse? There we go. One of the things I've already mentioned, sample ballots. If you haven't seen what you're going to be voting on, be sure to look up your sample ballot in advance. I'll highlight one of my favorite things to speak about on this. So one of my major initiatives as Secretary is to just get more information to voters. The most common question and request that we get in our office, I'm pretty sure the most common question Christina gets is, where is my voter guide? Because voters want to know. All of us know who's running for president. Maybe not everybody who's running for president, but we know the people who are likely, the real candidates running for president. But when it gets to your legislative races, your county races, like most people don't know county clerks are elected, they are. And definitely when you get to some of your local districts, I know there's some school board members and others here, often people don't know. And it really matters that you have the opportunity to look it up. One of the questions I've been getting a lot recently is about magistrate judges. And people are like, how do I find out information about magistrate judges? For the past 2 legislative sessions, I've pushed to, in addition to the voter pamphlet we have over here that has the constitutional amendment and the proposition, to add candidate information in there. Because I think people should be able to know what they're going to be voting on. And not surprisingly, not only the surrounding states, but what I'll call all our feeder states, so California, Oregon, Washington, all have voter guides. And so people moving here are like, where's my voter guide? And so we're trying as we can to get more information to voters. Putting the sample ballot on here is one of the first steps. And I'll highlight why this matters. So the 2020 election, I'll take questions if there are. 2020 election gets a lot of focus, and the scrutiny on elections has amped up considerably following the 2020 election. All the attention's on the presidential election. But for me, what was really highlighted is I was the Ada County clerk at the time, is we had a race for the Ada County Highway District. So if anyone's ever been through Boise, you are familiar with the Ada County Highway District. They are the ones who provide you all the road construction. And you cannot navigate downtown Boise right now without running into ACHD. They're the ones who are supposed to fill the potholes. They're the ones who are supposed to plow the roads. And I don't know anybody who lives in that area who has not at one point griped about ACHD. We had a very close race for the ACHD, one of the commissioner seats. And it ended up being 2 votes apart. 2 votes. So anybody who's ever doubting whether the vote counts, 2 votes apart. Out of 40,000 votes cast. 2 votes apart. That's less than 0.005% difference. So when you talk about the scrutiny and the expectations and the work that Christine and I do, that Nicole does with us, the expectations are just high as can be. And I can tell you, we can feel it in our office these days. So there's a number of stories I'm going to probably share about this one thing, because one of the first things I'll say is that out of that 2-vote race, what's important is it went through a very heated, contested recount. The attorneys, the candidates were involved. The results stood, which is exactly what should happen, right? So we lived up to those expectations. But the reason I focus on voter information and why I share it right now is one of the surprising things we learned of the ballots cast in that race, again, 2 votes apart. And any candidate who's run for office can tell you, anybody can find 2 people who didn't make it to the polls to vote. I was too busy, I got to get the kids, work went long, whatever the story may be with those 2 votes. What was most shocking, though, when we did the recount is of the 40,000 ballots that were cast in that election, 10,000 voters skipped the race. So it wasn't about getting people to show up and to turn out. These were people with a pen and a ballot in their hands, and they just didn't know who to vote for. So they skipped it. They probably voted for president, maybe they voted for Congress, but when it came to the local race, they just didn't know. And so it's so important that if we're going to rely on democracy as a tool to elect our representatives to serve us, we need to have people elect, being informed and electing who's going to lead them and represent their community. And so, it's been one of my big initiatives here. And so, thankfully, the new website is providing a great vehicle to get more information out. Hopefully, all of you received your voter pamphlet in the mail. It has lots of information, both about the website, but in particular about the constitutional amendment. It has arguments for and against. Proposition 1, it has arguments for and against, as well as the text of it in there. And so trying to get more tools for you. Now, I mentioned, so up here, If you're not sure, all your voting information, so if you want to find your polling place, really you can do it all here on the front page. Like all the basic information you need is here. Any of the specifics you can find your sample ballot. If you want to look at early voting, Twin Falls is towards the bottom. You can find out here where early voting information is. The area, so this is all your resources under voting that you'll need for the election coming up. But I'm going to highlight over here. So election results, we'll have our election results statewide posted up here. So anybody who's really interested in those statewide measures can find the information here. But I want to highlight, so this is the fun stuff, and this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking before I take questions, is our data and dashboards page. So I'm really fortunate. I'm a data geek at heart. We have Gabe Osterhout. He's our data visualization specialist. He's a data nerd too. What is great about Gabe is he takes all sorts of spreadsheets and he turns them into pictures so people like me can talk about them, and it makes it easier for everybody to understand. I'll highlight one just to start off. Here is our absentee tracking tool. So here's where we are. This is as of this morning, so this does not include the votes cast today. We'll update it first thing tomorrow morning, but you can see on the map. So we've already voted, I'm sure well over 150,000 Idahoans have already cast a ballot in this election. They've already voted. You see the breakdown there, 53,000 in-person early votes, 91,000 absentee votes, and then you can kind of see, we can switch it up a little bit here. Around here, let's go by county. Through here. Here's what it looks like for Twin Falls County in terms of the breakdown of the number of votes. I'm going to switch it so it actually looks like a county, not a legislative district. So there you go. But here's the breakdown. Absentee early votes, you can see, I mean, Twin Falls County is a red county, in case anyone was uncertain about that. I'm going to demonstrate it here. And this is our absentee votes, right? So we haven't even gotten election day votes in at this point in time. So you can kind of see a breakdown. We update this every day throughout the election. So any of the political junkies in the room that want to follow along, go follow the apps. You can kind of see as this rolls out. I will tell you from experience, early voting has been really busy. Around the state, we've heard early voting numbers are high in many of the counties. Still, most people procrastinate, so Thursday and Friday of next week will be the real, don't wait till then to go early vote. You will be better, especially the last day of early voting, it is better to go to your polling place on election day, because the last day of early voting is always when you're going to find the longest line, period. It's just how people are. You can find all this information here, kind of break down, see it by legislative district, however you want to play around and see some of the information. Just to highlight too, number, I didn't update. Maybe I did? All right, I'm going to have to play with that and figure it out. All right, going back to our data dashboards. I'm going to highlight a few of the other tools. So if we have questions about money and campaign finance, I'll talk about that because we're seeing a lot more money in the state of Idaho. But I want to highlight just, what's the makeup of the state and what's going on in our state. So this map is probably what you're thinking, but a little bit different at the same time. This is a snapshot of the registered voters for the state of Idaho. So you can see it broken down by county. You can see it's currently colored by party affiliation. This is not the results of any particular election. What this is how people are registered based on their party affiliation for the registered, just over 1 million registered voters. This hasn't been updated since the last surge of registrations, but it gives you a clear shot of what's happening in the state. As you can see, Idaho is a red state. If you were in doubt, here you go. I think here you guys probably know that's Blaine County, just north of you, the one that actually has a little bit of color to it. The breakdown you can see in terms of the makeup, I think this is important. So 59% of the registered voters in the state are registered as Republicans. That's compared to 13% are registered as Democrats. What's interesting, as I've been giving these presentations around the state, I've actually watched that number shift in terms of slightly larger. It went from 58 58 to 59% Republican, just in the months I've been going around talking about some of this information. You can see the breakdown here. For the real nerds, you can come back later, you can pick on, so we'll pick on Twin Falls, it'll filter it. So here's the makeup for Twin Falls County. 76% are registered as Republicans here in Twin Falls County. Oh, am I in Kesha? Oh, sorry, thank you. That's important. Well, now we'll see how you guys compare to Kesha. Oh. So 63% are registered Republicans here, now that I'm in the right county. You can see the breakdown. So lots of fun stuff. Remember some of these numbers real quick. I'm going to show a couple other fun things. One, you can look at it a couple of different ways. I'm just going to highlight here. One, you can look at it by legislative district. For the legislators in the room who want to see what it looks like. A refresh, here's what it does. Doesn't change a lot. I'm going to go back to county. Here we can color code it differently. This is by gender for all the ladies in the room. Women outvote men, period, consistently. I always like to highlight it's as though if you had to fight for the right, you're more likely to exercise it. You can see the breakdown there. And then last but not least, this is always fun, is the breakdown by age. I'll highlight this for just a moment. You can actually see where all our universities are based on this. Go figure. It's BYU Idaho, if you're wondering where that green dot is. That's where in Rexburg. I will note, because we're here on a college campus, and I talk about voting, and I see some students. Quite years back, I did a piece using some data visualization, and I titled it "The Young People Don't Vote," and I defined young people as anyone under 60. And the reason for that was we were comparing voting age population, and it wasn't until 60 and above that more than 50% of that voting age population voted in the general election. And so it's not unique. As much as we all want to pick on the college students, there's a need to get many people out to vote and to participate. I know people have busy lives. The number one reason people don't vote is because they're busy. But this highlights some of that. Now, I'm going to shift to the thing that has gotten the most attention that we have. All right, there we go. Because I think this is interesting, and I doubt you have a chance. So right here, I've been sharing this for a while now, so I know a few of you have already seen this information, but I can tell most haven't. One of the questions we get is just, what's happening in the state? There's people moving to the state of Idaho. What is happening here? So first and foremost, this map, for a few of you in the room, this is probably a dream. This is what you're hoping to wake up and see November 6th. I can tell you that's not the case. For other of you, it might be a nightmare. It just depends on where you lie on the political map. That's not what this is. This is not the result of any election. Gabe, our data visualization specialist, he stumbled on something. He's always looking at fun things we can do in the office. And one of the things he found is, so a piece of information we collect when people register to vote is their last known address. And we do that for a really practical reason. When someone moves here from California, they give us their previous address in California. Our office then notifies the California Secretary of State. John Doe has moved to Idaho. We're adding him to our voter rolls. Please remove him from your voter rolls. We do that with the other states. We share that information. That's the practical need. Same thing, like when someone's moving from, from Jerome here to Twin Falls, we want to make sure we remove them, move their data from one county to the other. So that's the practical reason we have it. Well, Gabe saw that information. He's like, I wonder what I can figure out with this. And this is what he came up with. When we first launched this, there was the Idaho Capital Sun did an article on it. We knew it would be neat to Idahoans. What we were surprised is shortly after, the Washington Post wrote about it, the Seattle Times wrote about it, the Portland, I can't remember what it's called, newspaper wrote about it. Because what I'm going to show you isn't just the Idaho story, it's really happening all over the country. So what this is voters moving to Idaho. Just like I showed you on the last map, People's Party affiliation, this is the states are colored by the party affiliation based on the people moving from those states. So if their last known address was another state. I'm not surprised, personally, to see it was a majority of Republicans, but I was surprised to see just how much. So out of the 49 other states, 48 of them have a majority of Republicans moving to Idaho. So you thought Idaho was a red state. Idaho is becoming a redder state based on this. The one exception, if you haven't picked it out on the map yet, is our friends in Vermont. So I'm sure a lot of you guys run into people from Vermont here. I will highlight, so yes, there are more Democrats than Republicans. It's because there was literally one more Democrat than Republican that moved to Idaho. So when you're looking at this, as I show some of the data, obviously you can see the percentages, the color, the party affiliation. The number below in parentheses is the raw number. There aren't a lot of people from Vermont moving to Idaho. That's generally true of the New England states. None of you are griping about all those people from Vermont changing our state. So we can highlight any of the different states, and I'm going to focus, but let's go over to where everybody's wondering here in the room. As we look at it, so our friends in Washington. Washington is not exactly known as a Republican stronghold. But here you go, 62% of the people moving from Washington are registering in Idaho as Republicans. One of the things I'll note is, because I'm sure a few of you have this thought, this is their first time registering in the state. So they don't know about our primary system. They don't know about all the different rules in our elections. This is a matter of first impression. The first time they registered in Idaho, this is the party affiliation they selected, and here you go. So again, 62%. It is interesting, Spokane is the #1 city where people are moving to. That's largely because it's a border city. We saw a lot more activity around the borders than other parts. And California has broken all their cities into small units, so there's that piece. So you can see here, so when we're looking at it compared to Vermont, you'll notice just over 12,000 Republicans moving from Washington. So a significant number. Now if we move down slightly, here's our friends in Oregon, 65. Now Oregon is definitely not known as a Republican stronghold. 65% of the people from Oregon, not as big in numbers as Washington. I will say, and I know, I see Representative Clow, Oregon has the newest strategy. Rather than sell their home and move to Idaho, they're just trying to move the border. So keep their home and become an Idahoan too. It's a new strategy in the midst of all of this. But I know everyone was wondering in the room, so let's just get to it. California. 75% of the people moving from California are registering as Republicans. And now look at those numbers. You've got almost 40,000 people moving from California. So it's true. It's not just how you feel when you're driving down the road. It is truly Californians moving to Idaho in droves. And so it's fascinating to see. So again, when I showed you the earlier map, we've actually seen the complexion of the state shift just over the last 6 months while sharing some of this information. Anyways, it's fascinating stuff. I'm going to highlight just to show you. So the real nerds in the room can do a deep dive later tonight as long as you want. My heart's content. So I'm going to highlight here. So this little hamburger menu icon, this will pop up. So now what we have here is the same map I was just showing you on the left. The map on your right, here, the shape of Idaho. So the one on the left is where people are moving from. The one on the right is where people are moving to. You can also see the age breakdown, the different makeup of everybody as we're going. You'll see up there at the top, so we're looking at 118,000 registered voters. We have about 1,040,000 registered voters right now for the entire state. So give you some, this isn't a small sample size. This is pretty significant. Now, I will say it's an imperfect data set, and that it's anybody whose last known address is out of state. There are people who moved here from another state, and then they moved again when they got here. And if they moved again when they got here, their last known address is their last Idaho address. So it doesn't capture everybody, but it's big enough size that it captures a whole heck of a lot of people. And you can kind of see this. Now let's see if I can get Twin Falls County right this time. Thankfully it's a lot bigger, so that made it easier. So one, we can filter it. So here's what you see for Twin Falls County. And so now you see a little bit more color in terms of the map. Why Alabama? I couldn't tell you. It doesn't quite make sense to me. Let's see, how many people moved from Alabama? Oh, there you go. So if anybody runs into the couple from Alabama, if you're in the room, I apologize for calling you out. I gave this presentation like 2 weeks ago, and you'll see when I do a deep dive, and a guy walked up to me, he's like, I'm one of those, and I know everybody you just highlighted on the map. But you can see the detail you can. So if you really want to know, let's go on a real deep dive. So in addition to filtering it on this side of the map, we can also click on any of the states, and it will drill right in. And so, we can pick whatever. So Fresno, California, right? Here are the people from Fresno that are moving to Twin Falls County in Idaho. And the makeup. So again, if any of you can identify with this, you can go find all your family and friends here on the map. I will say, what's interesting, and before I take questions, I'll just highlight, this is a really interesting, I definitely know enough to know this is playing out in Twin Falls as much as it's playing out in the rest of the state, is we do have this convergent. We have a lot of people. Idaho is one of the fastest growing states in the country. Every time we see a story about why Idaho is amazing, we cringe a little bit, right? Like, because there's so many people moving here. You can especially feel it in the Treasure Valley, but there's pockets throughout the state that are exploding in growth. I know there's been a lot of growth here. But one of the things interesting, so what we're seeing here is this concept called voting with your feet. This is happening all across the United States, where people are packing up and moving to be with people more like them, where there's certain lifestyle or certain type of thinking. This is the Idaho story that I just shared, but I'm pretty sure if I was sharing Colorado's information, we would see the same thing. It would just be blue instead of red. And we could go to any number of states. One of the things we've learned, and Nicole and I can attest to this, is we go around, so we meet with all the other states, the other secretaries of state. Everybody complains about California. That is a universal. There's all sorts of movement happening around the country, and it really is interesting to see. And one of the things is it's playing out in the State House. So especially now in my new role, I spend a lot of time in the State House and just watching the dynamics. I'm sure if you talk to some of the legislators here in the room, they can attest to this too. The legislature's changing because of the makeup of people that are moving here. People are flocking here because of our conservative values. But at the same time, and you can certainly appreciate this here in the Magic Valley, there's a difference moving from, say, Orange County, California, and growing up, say, here in Buell. There are some commonalities, but there's quite a bit of difference in terms of, and we are seeing this play out in the sense that, I have a lot of empathy for some of the people who move, because if you think about it, if you grew up, let's say you had multi-generation, but you grew up in Orange County when there were oranges there. It's worth noting Orange County is the home of former Republican Governor Ronald Reagan, and you watch the community change over time. And the community that you grew up in no longer looks like what you remember, and you're raising your family, and so you decide, you know what, I don't fit here anymore. So you pack up and you move someplace else. You move to the Magic Valley to identify. One of the challenges, it takes a lot to get to the point to pack up your family and move. And so you get here, and the challenge is you get here and you're still a little amped up, and so you turn on the news and it doesn't calm your fears, right? We see this a lot in the Panhandle because the media market for Coeur d'Alene is still the Spokane media market. So instead of hearing about Boise, they hear about Olympia, right? So your temperament doesn't change. But also like ag issues, right? So if you're an Idaho potato farmer, your issues feel a lot different than if you're somebody who, former law enforcement officer from California. And we're seeing that kind of weave itself together and play out this tussle in the State House. I'll share one last thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. But one of the most fascinating things I think about this is we did this data. It got a lot of attention because it's fun, interesting stuff. Shortly after we did ours, the Los Angeles Times had done their own piece. So at the end of December last year, the LA Times did a feature story on the Eagle, Idaho's mayor's race. Why on earth would the LA Times care about Eagle, Idaho? For those who don't know, Eagle is a small suburb outside of Boise. It's about 25,000 people, so it's not even like it doesn't even compete here with Twin Falls. So they focused on it, and what they did the same thing we did, except they didn't use voter data. What they were looking at was California's pension program, CalPERS, kind of like Percy here in Idaho. They were looking at where all the pension money goes. So a majority of CalPERS money goes back into California. People retire where they work, but they looked at everywhere else. And the 83616 zip code is the largest recipient of California public money in the United States. Says that. Like, you talk about growth. In that article, they called it Mini Orange County because, and if you've been there, my parents live in Eagle, so I can attest to this. It's fascinating to see, and the differences too. So you have a lot of firefighters, police officers, people who are public employees in California who've moved there, but it's also so different. And if you ever have a chance, you're driving through Eagle, you'll feel this. Is they sold their home, so they had like their middle class lifestyle in California. They sold their home and bought 3 of them in Idaho. I grew up not far from there, and I can tell you, I do not remember seeing Ferraris when I was a kid. But you see this convergence and change as our communities are, and we're seeing it play out in legislative races and other places as some of our communities are starting to shift and change a little bit. And everywhere I talk, it doesn't matter whether you're a multi-generation Idahoan or you just moved here 4 weeks ago, everyone can identify with this story a little bit because it really is what's happening around our state. Like I said, I have all sorts of stuff. I have more data visualizations, I have all sorts of stuff, but I think what's really fun is to have a chance to answer your questions. And so, President Fisher.
Thank you. I feel like one of those old television shows where they're going over to Election Central over on the side.
Oh, there you go. Is this the spin room? Is that what this is? I've never been there, but
Perhaps. There are file cards being moved around the room and some pencils if you want to write questions, and then those will come up to me and I'll pose them. But I'll give you a question while we get those collected.
I can see cards being gathered, so there are questions coming.
And this is just truly something that has intrigued me, and so I'm going to give you, and not trying to stump you, but in 1980, I can pull up the YouTube clip, send you a link later, but in 1980,
I was born. Oh, that wasn't your...
That was not the question.
Oh, sorry.
1980, the NBC News and the other networks color-coded Reagan states that he was winning as blue and Walter Mondale states as red. Why did we change the colors?
Oh, that is a stump. I answer obscure questions. I can tell you why we vote on a Tuesday. I don't know that.
Truly, I mean, it's just 80 to 84, the colors used by the network for states. There was a sea of blue, and it was Reagan as the president.
I do not know. I can tell you the jersey colors are solidly set now.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been set, but...
Okay. Who's got questions? I see cards being gathered. Some questions? Go for it. Just go. We'll lead off, and then we'll get to the cards.
I want to thank you for the data analytics you provided. It's really going to help counter a lot of different things that you're about unfolding. So about this thing coming, you try to change that with the comments. I didn't know if you could.
Thank you.
Just glad. I got my little pamphlet, and this bullet list out front. I just have one question. The bullet list, second from bottom, says safe and secure elections. Could you paint quick context for what is the safe election?
A safe election?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think safe and secure, one that people should be able to vote uninterrupted and unimpeded. I think in this environment, one of the changes we did this last legislative session that I'll highlight related to that is electioneering at the polls. So this is, you should be able to go to your polling place and vote on November 5th and not have any interference, regardless of what your political position or opinion is. Be able to get out of your car, go cast your ballot unimpeded. We used to have, our law said you couldn't be within 100 feet of the polling locations. Just because of some of the incidents we've had at some of our polls, that has now been expanded to 250 feet, as well as now it is an enforceable citation by law enforcement for disrupting voters when you're in that protective bubble. This is, whether this is people putting up signs or doing other things, probably the biggest one that we had, so a year ago, it was a city election in November, at early voting in Kootenai County, so Coeur d'Alene, there was a car accident of political operatives fighting for the same parking space to put up their giant sign out at the polling location. So one of the things, we're fortunate, and I can say for the people in battleground states, this is a bigger issue in terms of being able to not be stopped or impeded in terms of voting. So I think, if you look in the voter panel, we outlined many of the same, it was before we had the 12 principles, but some of the things that we're doing to help ensure the integrity of the election. So, yeah.
Okay, I've got a variety of questions, and I'll do my best to get through all of these in the time that's allowed. Question number one, has your team found any credible examples of voter fraud in the 2020 election? And I'll narrow it, obviously, to Idaho, because you're not qualified to speak on the other 49 states.
I do talk to the other 49 states, but one of the hardest things in terms of when we talk about voter fraud is when I spend time, there are two narratives: either it's rampant or it's non-existent, because we hear from groups on different fronts. Neither of those are true. It does exist. We do have voter fraud cases, and we do pursue them. This is a great opportunity just in terms of storytelling. So one of the features of our making sure the integrity and security of our elections is when somebody votes an absentee ballot, part of the process is the voter who returns that ballot must sign the envelope returning it. There's an affidavit that they sign on the back of it. We check 100% of the signatures on the returned absentee ballots. So if you forget to sign it, your vote will not count. Christina and team are back there, they're like, yes, we have people every day going through and checking signatures. Our office provides training with law enforcement on signature verification and what to look for, the elements of it. But remember that 2-vote race I mentioned in 2020? So again, I gave you one reason to think about that race. In that 2-vote race, our office had rejected 3 absentee ballots. You can appreciate everybody involved was really interested in those 3 ballots. So the attorneys, the candidates, they got to review them, look at it. I'm happy to say they all agreed that we should have rejected all 3 of them. One of those 3, though, so one I think was like a mixed signature. I don't remember, it was a spouse signing the other ones, but still, you have to sign your own ballot. The other one was someone drew an inappropriate picture on it. Why someone would waste the time to do that, I don't know, but I can tell you stories about absentee ballots and the strange stuff we get. The third, though, was the signature was a beautiful flowing signature. Full first name, full middle name, full last name. Now, I'm sure all of you sign everything that way. The signature, though, the handwriting, you wanted to accept it because it just looked like a beautiful signature. I would say it had kind of a feminine and slightly older touch, like when they used to teach handwriting. Now, one of the things, when we're comparing those signatures, and this is true for every voter, we have access to both the signature on your voter registration card and the signature on your driver's license. And we can easily pull those up and access them. The driver's license, in this case, was a hot, squiggly mess. Now, the voter was an 18-year-old male. Which signature sounds more accurate? The hot, squiggly mess. It didn't take us very much work to figure out that signature I mentioned matched Mom's handwriting perfectly. And it doesn't matter if you're related, it's still a crime to vote twice. And so that is just one of a handful of examples in terms of us pursuing and making sure that we're holding up the process, that we're making sure that the process is done the way it should, and holding people accountable who try to interfere with that process.
Question, how do you How do you verify that a voter has voted in another precinct without having internet connections between the two?
Really good question, especially because I spoke about it. So in elections, to answer your question, we have two predominant systems in our elections. So we have what I'll call the vote system, the voting system. That is the system that produces the ballot. It's the one that reads and scans the boxes or the ovals that you've marked. It's the one that produces the results. That's our voting system. That is the system that is never connected to the internet. So when you think of it, you drop it in the ballot box, scanner, or whatever, that system is never connected to the internet. The other system is our statewide voter registration system. We have a system, it's a database full of everybody, registered voters information. It's when you look yourself up on voteidaho.gov, you're tapping into the state voter registration system to be able to see your voting information. That is networked. All 44 counties are interconnected together. There's two reasons that they're separate. First, one of the main reasons is you have a constitutional right to a secret ballot. We go through painful steps to ensure that at no point can we identify who you voted for with your voting information, like to maintain that secrecy. That way there's no coercion or anything else in terms of voting process. But the other part is just the security features, right? This is how when someone moves from one county to the other, we can verify. So here in Twin Falls, if someone goes and drops, let's say they get an absentee ballot, they go drop it in the mailbox right out in front of the elections office, and then they walk in and they early vote, instantly, Christina's office will see that they've already voted, and only one of those votes will ever be counted. Same thing at the polls, all the precincts know between each other. One of the best things that we've improved the process here in the state is our electronic poll books. So now if you check in at your polling place, you'll see kind of an iPad device that you check in on. It actually scans your driver's license barcode to find you right away, makes it faster and smoother for you, but it also adds security features in it because that information is connected to make sure that no one can vote twice. That's one of the elements. But also, I'll say, for me, in my role, part of my responsibility is to make sure the uniform application of our election laws across the state. We have almost 1,000 precincts in the state of Idaho, and I want them to all run the same way. The e-poll book serves as a basic tutorial, so the poll workers all follow it. They have to ask you for your ID because they can't skip that step and issue you a ballot until they go through step by step. And, I get to talk about the election laws and do a lot of things, but it's really our poll workers who serve at the polls that are true people handling our election laws and maintaining the integrity. They're the ones checking the IDs, issuing the ballots, and making sure it works well. And I can tell you this election could not happen without over 5,000 Idahoans who have signed up to serve as poll workers across our state. So I don't know if any of you are serving as poll workers, but if you are, thank you for your service, because it wouldn't be possible for the rest of us to vote without you.
I would have predicted that this question would come up.
Okay.
Is the Secretary of State concerned about Prop 1 and how it might change voting, recounts, and such?
Am I concerned about it? I guess no matter what. So Proposition 1, I think most people are probably familiar with it. Proposition 1, it was a citizens initiative that was circulated around the state. We got enough signatures to be on the ballot, so I'll be voting on it. You probably know it best by seeing yard signs everywhere that either say vote yes for open primaries or vote no against ranked choice voting. I will say one of the things I'm seeing around the state is that the advocates, that whether you're for it or against it, one is focused on the primaries, one is focused on the general. It can feel like two questions. It's actually one. It is the one and the same. So if you're not sure when you've seen those signs, it is both. It does change both our primary election process. Right now we have broken out party primaries. The Republican primaries have been closed, the Democratic primaries have been open. This would combine all of them. So it wouldn't just combine those two parties, the Constitutionalists, Libertarians. You would all have all of the candidates together on the primary ballot. You would vote for one, just like you currently do. And then what would happen is the top 4 candidates would move forward to the general election ballot. And this is where you see the ranked choice voting. That would be applied where instead of voting for one candidate, you would rank your candidates. The change, and then through like this series of multi-rounds, I can get into more weeds if anybody has questions on the details of how this works, but there would be multiple rounds of voting that could be tabulated to get voters. It's kind of like a runoff election where you'd have one election and a subsequent, but you do it simultaneously. The primary changes are relatively easy for us to make those changes between the state and the counties. The changes to the general election are more complicated. We would need to replace the voting systems I've been talking about in order to process a ranked choice voting ballot. So in that sense, yes. I will say I haven't taken a public position on this, in large part because, one, I answer a million questions about how does this work, what's it going to do, and I've been involved in 2 Supreme Court cases already on this issue, and if it were to pass, I anticipate to be involved in more Supreme Court cases, so we're close to it. But I can answer more questions about Prop 1 if anybody has them.
Okay. Question, what is the context for and the word safe is in quotes,
I think
election?
that same, yeah, I think we've answered that question.
All right. Is there a concern that voting with our feet will further deepen the political divide within our nation?
Yes. It is dividing our nation. Like, it's interesting. We're even seeing, when I talk about voting with other people, like self-sorting, we're even seeing it within the state. Like people who were once, like I grew up in this area, but now I got to move. Heck, in the Treasure Valley, we're seeing it, let alone. But I know people who've like moved from Boise to Coeur d'Alene to be, you kind of see some of this sorting, and I think it is. And actually, there was a great article in the 2020 cycle by Tara Westover. So she's the woman who wrote Educated. Some people in southeastern Idaho. It's the New York Times bestseller. But this was later. She wrote an article, and I thought it was really thoughtful in the sense that we can relate to it here. So she was talking about where she grew up. She grew up in rural Idaho, very rural Idaho. You can think of anywhere surrounding here right now. Think of it. But now, I don't know where she's at, if she's in Boston or in New York. But as she basically framed it, she said the people in Boston and New York can no more relate to the people in Buell than the people in Buell can relate to the people in New York. And that divide is getting harder. There's always been some of that, but I think we're seeing more of that, and we see it. Again, what I was sharing earlier, the people moving here, your issues are different if you just move from an urban area and you're worried about safety and crime than if you're worried about water. Right? Talk to some of the farmers in eastern Idaho right now. Their number one issue is water. That versus safety. And so I definitely think we're seeing that play out. I want to jump back really quick just to the safety question, just because this is my life, and it is challenging, the toxicity and the level of it. Majority of Americans care about their country. They want the best for their country. Unfortunately, as we've seen both nationally, we have people who have poor intentions. Like the assassination attempts on President Trump are some of the best examples of that. We're not immune from that either. So this morning, Nicole was leading a safety training for our staff, because already we've received envelopes with white powder. One of the toughest, what does your Secretary of State do? Most of the time, on election day, I sit around waiting until something doesn't go as planned. But if it's going smoothly, they could really care less what I'm doing. It's when it doesn't go smoothly. So I'll give you 2 really good examples of that. So a year ago in August, I was actually here in the Magic Valley. I was in Jerome. I was on my way to the Jerome County Elections Office to check things out on Election Day. And I get a call because in Orofino, it's up in Clearwater County, they were voting that day, and there was a wildfire, and the wildfire was entering the city, and they had to evacuate the polling place because of the wildfire while voting was taking place. And surprise, our manuals, our laws don't say what do you do when a wildfire comes to town. And so, miraculously, we were able to move things and still be able to facilitate it, and the election stood. I honestly, in the moments, was like, there's no way. You're going to appreciate some of my peers who are in hurricane-stricken areas right now. It's tough. Similarly, 2 weeks ago, roughly, I think, when Shelley, I get a text from one of the county clerks, and she's like, and this is surprising to me, this is not how the county clerk should handle the situation. She's like, hey, I've got a bit of a problem. Can you call me right away? I call her, and it was not a bit of a problem. The county clerk, so they were opening the mail, right? Some people who work in the courts can really appreciate that other people open their mail. They were opening the mail, two clerks are going through it, and all of a sudden, poof, they're both covered in white powder. There was a letter to one of the judges that had burst, and so all of a sudden you have two terrified clerks. Hazmat comes in, shows up, and so at this point, like, why am I involved? There's a letter to a judge. Well, Hazmat wants to take all of the mail and everything else because they need to test it to make sure this isn't, they're keeping everybody else except for these two people isolated as they go through it. They want to take all the mail. Well, in the mail are 30 absentee ballots. And so all of a sudden, Nicole and I have worked with FBI, the United States Postal Inspection Service, to try and figure out, all right, what are our protocols to ensure chain of custody and to make sure that those ballots aren't tampered with, that those ballots will still get counted, and everything else. And unfortunately, we talk about safety and security elections. These are some of the issues, even in Idaho, that we are confronting when it comes to just administering your ability to vote.
Question, does the constitutional amendment change anything? Our rules already prohibit non-citizens from voting, correct?
Yeah, the constitutional amendment, great question. There's not a lot of conversation about the constitutional amendment, but it's on there. HJR 5, the legislature passed. And the way I like to define it is it's an exclamation point to say that only citizens vote in our elections. This is different than some of the citizenship discourse you hear, in the news and stuff right now. What the genesis of it, the group that brought it to the legislature, and I've supported it, I will note, is there are 11 municipalities in the United States, none of which are in Idaho, that have authorized non-citizens to vote in their local elections. So Seattle's the closest to us that has authorized non-citizens to vote. Concerns about that happening more, and the nuance is our Constitution says it defines a registered voter as being a citizen, but it's silent to what about non-citizens. So adding this provision makes it clear that it doesn't matter what type of election, any government election, so from your cemetery district all the way to your presidential election, only citizens vote in Idaho elections.
Okay, there's three questions on one card, so I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick question dump, and you can take them as you wish. Dual citizens, can they vote?
The United States does not recognize dual citizenship, period. There is no such thing as a dual citizen according to the United States of America.
Yep.
Why vote for a candidate when there is no challenger?
Yeah.
So, that's a personal choice for fair enough. Yeah, I don't know if you're talking about magistrates, because I will note magistrate elections are funny because they're not opposed. It's a retention election, so you're actually voting just whether the person keeps their job or not. If more than 50% say no, they lose their job. Otherwise, yes, they retain their job. But we do have the primary election is where so many elections are determined in the state of Idaho, and so we do have lots of candidates unopposed.
I'm going to interpret the question a little differently. We've got a county prosecutor that's running unopposed. Why do we need to have him on a ballot so that we can vote yes or no if there is no other opponent?
For Grant Loeb's ego.
Okay. All right.
And he would like your votes. I will tell you, and there are people in the room who can easily tell you, and that's not just Grant. Everybody, like judges, even though they may be retained with like 80%, they can tell you exactly how many votes they got. And they go to each other and say, well, look, I got 15 more votes than you did. Like, exactly.
Judge Wellman, you can deliver the message tomorrow.
He'll attest that's true, isn't it?
And
It is true. We're the most popular.
the final
Just like
question
high
on
school.
this.
It doesn't change.
The final question on this card is about, is there a baby boomer factor in the folks that are moving to Idaho?
I don't have the data that I can show it, but yes, like the population moving to Idaho is more, it's not entirely retirees, but it is an older generation. And actually, I don't know if you guys are experiencing it here, but you can see it in particular in the Treasure Valley because the big school districts are closing schools. So some school districts are having to build new schools. Other school districts are actually closing schools because the people moving here and buying the houses don't have kids. And so it's like creating it's just an interesting shakeup in terms of the infrastructure.
I think we feel the influx about 4 to 6 on Blue Lakes Boulevard every day, the traffic jams. It's not Eagle Road, though. Why are there 5 independent candidates running for president?
Great question. I mean, the independent candidates have to go through a process and get 1,000 signatures from Idahoans in order to qualify to be on the ballot. There's a whole process our office administers to be able to get there. The most common question, we had a meeting right before we came today, is we have people coming on and say, why is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on my ballot? Well, he's on there because he wants to be. He went through the process. I know he's announced, and so in some states he is withdrawn, but in states that are battlegrounds, he has remained on the ballot. Idaho is one of the states he chose to remain on the ballot. So that's just one example.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Secretary, you may have insight into this question, so I'll just read it, but I am not clear about the particulars on the background. Why is there a candidate running for president that is a non-natural born citizen?
Yeah, Shiva, I can't pronounce his last name. It's really interesting. So we became aware of this, just like some others in the room, that we have a candidate. So in order to qualify to be president by the United States Constitution, you need to be a natural born citizen. We learned after the ballots, the printing deadline for the ballots, that there was a question regarding it. So we learned at a point where it's too late. We have sent a letter and contacted the candidate and campaign to verify their situation. But the other part of it that's kind of interesting, so since we're at a college, we'll just get into the really nerdy weeds of this. When you vote on your ballot, you will not be voting for the presidential candidates. You won't vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or anybody else. You're actually voting for the 4 electors to go to the Electoral College to nominate them. Our office oversees that process, so we actually vet thoroughly the 4 electors to make sure they're qualified to be on the Idaho ballot. So as part of the process, and this is true, doesn't matter whether it's the electors for President Trump or it's the electors for the independent candidates. That's actually where most of our attention and focus has been on, which is, I think this raises some interesting questions about how we do that process. But this is all going back to, if you remember in school studying the Electoral College, we're in the deep weeds of Electoral College work right now.
I think the next question is going to rely on you interpreting some voter intent, but in your example about the election that was decided by 2 votes, you mentioned that 10,000 people did not vote in that race. Why assume that they didn't vote because they didn't know? Why not assume that they didn't vote because they didn't like either of the candidates?
Oh, sure. I'm not going to take issue with that. Interestingly enough, some states, I think Nevada has it, where they have added a none of the above option, which doesn't really help you because somebody still has to take the job. It could easily be that. We do get into, I kind of alluded to it, but when you mentioned voter intent, when we do the audits or we do recounts, we get to see everything in terms of it. So these are ballots that weren't marked in that race, so there's no markings, but we do get into obscure things. I always like to talk specifically about absentee ballots. One of the things that makes absentees a little bit unique is that we send them out into the wild, and every now and then they look like they came back from the wild. I've received gummy bears with absentee ballots in the past. Every now and then we receive cash. I've had voters cut out their votes instead of mark them. We get manifestos across the ballots. So the majority of voters do exactly what the rest of you in the room do. They mark it, but we see all sorts of things in the process. And when we get into the recounts and the audits is where we really have to go through it. So this 2-vote race, there were ones where it's what was the voter intending? We had in one of the audits in Canyon County just back in June, the voter had marked the first race. So in this case, it was for Congressman Fulcher. Did it just like you'd think. Okay, that's great. And then for whatever reason, every other vote, instead of filling in the oval, they made a squiggle scratch mark net off to the right of the candidates' names. And you're it would be one thing if they did that uniformly, but they didn't even do it all the same. And I don't know what they were trying to do. Right? We did count the one vote. We didn't count the others, but we get tested with those kind of questions when it comes to the election.
Okay, I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to add a few of my additional thoughts that I would be interested in. The question is, please speak to voter intimidation at the polls. I actually would be more interested, can you tell us about what are the legal protections that would prevent that? And if your office learned about voter intimidation, what would be done about the voter intimidation?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of already spoke to this about when I was mentioning the electioneering at the polls and the polling place. You should be unimpeded, and there should not be, whether it's from poll workers, poll watchers, voters, there shouldn't be campaigning at the polling locations. I think one of the things we did really improve, and I do want to recognize Senator Harkin, because she was instrumental in getting these changes done and working on multiple drafts with us, is to make sure that you should be able to go and vote unblocked. We have had instances, so we had a case that where actually a poll worker was prosecuted for handing out materials that they shouldn't at a polling location. Doesn't matter where you lie on this. This is a neutral ground and should be protected that way. You should be able to vote without anything. So if there's any problem, notify your county clerk's office. That's really, they can work with local law enforcement in terms of enforcement. If we have to, we would easily get involved.
Will post-election audits be possible if Prop 1 passes?
Wow, good question. So as I already mentioned, we do post-election audits after every primary and general election. That would still be the same if Prop 1 passes. I think what this teases out, yes, we can and would still do post-election audits even if it passes, but those audits, just like getting the final results on election day, will take longer than they currently do. There's just a bit, it's more involved than just counting one round of voting, so you'd have to do multiples. Yeah, you want to flesh that out a little more?
For the audits, is that 100% audit of every precinct, or is it selected?
For the audits that we do, right now it's random. So we do on November 11th, somewhere around there. November 15th, that's why Nicole's here. She makes things actually run on time. On November 15th, the state controller, state treasurer, and I, we're the state board of canvassers, will meet, and we have a whole process where we draw counties, and then we'll draw precincts, and then we send out teams to go audit those. So Christine and team are like watching YouTube, like, please don't beat me, please don't beat me.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Since you're a resident of Ada County, this might make more sense to you than it makes to me, but will the portal in Ada County be made available statewide?
Oh, it already is. So what the question is for the real political junkies and the candidates, we have now what we call it's Candidate Vault. So your voting information, so anybody who's gotten political mailers, it's because people get the voter list from our office or the county and they send stuff out. We do have a candidate vault on voteidaho.gov. So same one-stop shop for all resources. Candidates can pay for a subscription to go on and be able to pull. So they get things like the absentee lists, like who's requesting it. So if you've ever requested an absentee ballot and then noticed you get a bunch of mailers right after that, it's because they get that information. It's publicly available information that candidates get and send it. So it's not coincidental that you're getting them in such close timing and proximity to one another. But yes, it is already available statewide.
Okay, there's a question that cites Idaho Code 341107.
Okay.
And I could read that part to you, but the question is, what's to prevent someone from walking out with a ballot, and how would this bring faith in our elections without a paper?
Don't be.
If this is your question, yell it out, because the writing's a little tough for me to decipher.
I probably know enough to know the exit record. Is that your question?
Yeah, it's about the actual reporting to vote people about it, because the statute specifically states there's supposed to be record, and there's never been a record yet of the electorate that's voted.
There is a record, and I mean, everyone who's voted has voter history. So the electronic poll book records the person has voted, and
It's a completely separate statute.
It is a separate statute, but it is doing the record keeping and tracking. And we do, I think this is a good question. When we do the audits, we don't just audit the manual count to the results report. We also check the number of check-ins, so the number of people who showed up and voted and the signatures that were captured on election day against the number of ballots cast, so that that information also reconciles. So part of the auditing is to make sure everything balances.
But I mean, it's like anybody knows, it's like you go to a motel, you check in, you go to your room, then you check out. There's that checking ballots, but that checking ballots doesn't exist with this current system we have.
I guess I don't see we're comparing the number of votes to the number of people who voted. I don't see the possible discrepancy here.
Right, but the statute specifically says there's supposed to be a record kept of the people that voted.
Which there is. I can provide you the list of voters, but there is, and most importantly, the substance of making sure that those records match with the number of ballots cast is met.
So how many times do the numbers been wrong then?
We do find variance. That's a good question.
You go check in and go for out.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We do experience variance, right? So when we do the audits, one of the things we're looking for is to match, and we record. So like, if you look at our last audit report, you'll find instances where they didn't necessarily match. I think it's actually, because of the community we're in, is a really good area to highlight. So one of the statutes I helped change a couple of years ago is elections. When you think about the scale and the size of the work that's doing, so Twin Falls County Elections Office is the largest event planning operation in Twin Falls County, period. Because when you think about it, they're processing, what do you have, 87,000 registered voters, something like that, right? Huh? 43. All right, I doubled the number. All right, 43,000 people that they're inviting out to vote. And there is this desire for all of us, in the examples I've given, to have a perfect election without any flaws. But we go through it and things happen. And so one of the best examples, we actually got a letter from Congress last December highlighting this. In Jerome County, there was an election, it was a school district election for school trustee, and there was an error in terms of a couple of people were able to vote who shouldn't have been able to vote in that particular election. Cy, the county clerk, noticed it, saw it, and rather than wait for any of the, and it was determined, it was a really close race. I can't remember the margin, but it was not a lot of votes cast, like 200 some votes total cast, but it was a razor thin race in determining that. So we have a statute for judicial review where actually this went to a judge to be reviewed in terms of, one, the clerk's office saying, hey, we made a mistake, right? We found a discrepancy, just like your example. And this discrepancy looks like it could change the outcome of the election. And so the judge reviewed it. In this case, it was really simple math. We've seen both versions of this. But in this case, the judge ordered a new election. So Jerome County had a new vote in that particular case because you're like, you know what, to go back to the confidence piece, you're like, no, this is too close, we can't have confidence. And so we record and track any events that happen in the election along the way. So if there's something that when we have those close elections, we can provide it to the candidates, the parties involved, to make sure that we do meet what everybody's intention is to make sure it's a proper reflection of the community when people vote.
And I'm going to steal the last question for myself. And it's more curiosity. What does Idaho law provide if there's an absolute pure
Tie?
and you've gone through the recount tie?
Yeah, you don't even have to get to the recount. We do the tie first, and then we get to the recounts after the tie. And I've done it a couple of times. So in the real rare chance that we get like a governor's race that is down to the wire, we will decide it by a coin flip. I have flipped coins to decide races in the state of Idaho. Like, I got featured briefly on the New York Times because I did a slow-mo video, like, practicing my coin flip. Usually we see it in the very small election, like coin flips happen in the really low turnout or, like a precinct committee race or something else. But in theory, we could determine our governor someday using a coin.
Kennedy $50 or a quarter?
Oh, come on, a Susan B. Anthony dollar. What are we talking about? This is voting. Come on, that was easy.
Okay. Would you please join me in thanking Secretary McGrain? Thank you, sir.
Thank you
for the drive over. We are adjourned. Thank you.